Hello, my name is Tim Downs. I'm with SmartGig Media. I'm here hosting what I think is going to be a very interesting and informative podcast focused on private LTE networks, private wireless networks, private cellular, all of it, and how it applies specifically to the manufacturing industrial sector. Joining us today are two knowledgeable guys in the industry. First of all, we have Mike Owen, who's the Chief Technology Officer of BearCom. We also have Greg Kamer, who's the Technical Product Manager at Cradlepoint. Before we get into our conversation and discussion, I'm going to give each one of these nice guys a few minutes to talk about themselves and their role at their company. So, Mike Owen, why don't you take it away, give us a few thoughts about yourself.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Tim, and I appreciate the introduction there. So Mike Owen, Chief Technology Officer here at BearCom. BearCom, we're a system integrator. What we primarily focus on is solving problems for our customers. For 40 years, this company has been building different solutions in the RF environment, taking that technology out to our customers and solving the problems that our customers have or what they're trying to accomplish, using that RF space to really enhance their business capabilities. We're located throughout the United States of America and Canada. Our headquarters is in Garland, Texas, and we're really excited to have this conversation today about what we can do, in that manufacturing space and really leverage what you can do with a private network, in that LTE, in that CBRS band, or in that space and really enhance what your business is capable of accomplishing.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Greg, take it away.
Yeah, hey, Tim. I'm Greg Kamer, Technical Product Manager with Cradlepoint. I focus on our NetCloud private network solutions. We have many solutions, including security, SD-WAN, wireless routers, wireless adapters for cellular or hard lines. But for me, it's more about the private cellular environment.
Great. So we all three have lived in this emerging world of private cellular, private wireless networks for a few years now. Let's do a little level set about exactly what private wireless is. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about just your view on how that's different from a public cellular network, why that might be beneficial, and why there's a trend afoot right now that's gaining speed as far as we can see with enterprises, education, government, but mostly enterprises and a lot of manufacturing too, leading the way to deploying a private cellular or private LTE network. Can you just give us a little bit of the background here?
Sure, I would love to. When you think about a wireless network within a facility, and you think about what is it utilized for? What are the use cases around that? And oftentimes, we think about we have Wi-Fi within, say within our industrial, within our manufacturing space, we have a Wi-Fi network, and we utilize that network to for some of the activities we do. But part of what the world is transitioning to, and it's especially as we move more towards this Industry 4.0, and we really move towards this machine-to-machine communications, this machine-to-human communications, where when we think about in the manufacturing floor, we need everything to be able to talk to everything. So there's this really drive towards how can I build a more enhanced, high-speed, low-latency network that's really closed loop for my environment. When we start talking about utilizing cellular technology or using an LTE, long-term evolution technology, to drive towards that, there's a lot of things we gain from that aspect of it. From the LTE space, when we really look at that, the way that RF propagates, the characteristics of that RF are vastly different from how Wi-Fi does, and that gives us the ability to build a more enhanced network. And we say, well, why don't we just use that public cellular network that's already out there, that's already an LTE network? It's already, the term a lot about fifth generation or 5G network. Why don't I just utilize that? Well, when you talk about what you're trying to do is you really want to build a network, and I used that term closed loop before, where it's your network, and it's really built around you and built around what you want to accomplish. And so when you start talking about a private cellular network, that's really what you're trying to drive towards. You're trying to drive towards where I can take all the advantages of LTE and 5G, but I can build it in such a way that I control that network. I own that network. I can have that close edge type latency where I have that RF, it's coming off of that system. It's not going out to the public cloud and then coming back to me. It is staying closed loop within my environment. And what does that gain me? That it gains me that increased latency, that, or decrease the latency speeds. It gives me that ability to have a really fast network that has high throughput that I can start utilizing, driving towards that fully connected environment. One of the things you talk about that, we've really been working towards this in the past couple of years. And one of the big drivers towards that was, the federal government opening up what we call the CBRS spectrum, or Citizens Broadband Radio Spectrum. And so this is a block of spectrum from 3.55 to 3.7 gigahertz. That's an open use frequency. It is something that it's available for anybody to use it. There's different tiers within that. You have incumbents, you have what they call PAL or priority access licenses, and you have GAA or general availability. But it gives a business the ability to operate an LTE network utilizing a band of spectrum that the federal government has set aside specifically around these type of networks. When it first came out, it was called the Innovation Band. It was a really drive towards, hey, how can we help industry? How can we help people be more innovative about what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish in that RF world? And that's one of the really exciting things about it is it gives just anybody the ability to go out and create their own cellular network that they control, that they have access to, that they can determine how it's going to operate in their space and how they can utilize it to enhance specifically the use cases that they're trying to derive within their vertical. And as we talk about here, is specifically around manufacturing. It's such a valuable asset that can be utilized. And back to, how do I drive towards Industry 4.0?
Greg, I have a question for you. You're a technical guy, and we're talking about private LTE as applied to an enterprise. In my experience, there's almost two separate languages that are spoken. Here we come out of the LTE world and the mobile world, and it's complicated. And going into the enterprise world, which Cradlepoint, spends a fair amount of time in, talk to me about, marrying up an LTE kind of environment and technology and complexity with an enterprise IT environment. What does that mean, and how complicated is it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think the first answer I will give is it can be quite complicated, at least here on the back end. Those of us building it, designing it, things of that nature, the actual product set, that is, not the network. But one of the things we're really striving for, specifically at Cradlepoint, is giving a network to a customer that's very easy to use. We manage it all through our NetCloud Manager, or NCM. We provide all the parts and pieces to do it. We're even looking at seeing how we can homogenize technology terms to make it a little more interesting. So if I may, one of the big things that happens all the time is roaming, right? Now, when I come from the Wi-Fi world before I got into this, and when I think of roaming, I think of going from one AP and moving to the next AP. But the last time I said that in the cellular world, somebody about punched me in the face because it means something completely different. So we start getting in a handoff. So I think one of the bigger challenges, you've got the technological challenge, but I think you've got the terminology challenge as well. And I think there's also, at times, there's people that just kind of get scared that say like, oh, you're coming for my Wi-Fi network, you're going to replace it with private cellular, private LTE, whatever it is. And no, that's not really the case. These are different connectivity types that can be used for different things and in harmony too. There may be certain situations where LTE is going to be better than Wi-Fi, but it doesn't mean we're going to rip out that whole entire thing, right? So, but at the end of the day, really what we're trying to do is make it simple to use, simple to maintain, and simple to integrate into your network. So the solution looks very Wi-Fi-like, right? We have the core, which you could think of as kind of analogous to the controller. You have the access points, which they're technically called eNode Bs, but we just call them APs because people know what those are. And then on top of that, we have the SIMs. That's really going to be the biggest difference. But if it's just like other people experiencing security issues in the industry, a SIM is much easier to deploy than, say, like a certificate to a computer. So it's something that, yes, is difficult, but we're trying to take the friction out and trying to make it very easy to consume.
Yeah, and coming from the Wi-Fi world, that at the end of the day, this stuff's just got to work, right? They really
100%.
don't really need to know or want to know how it works. But that gets back to, kind of the systems integrator has to put it all together and kind of take away the complexity from the customer.
100% right.
So, and Mike, so how do you do that? How do you go into an enterprise customer long before you start talking about whether it's a Wi-Fi or an LTE or a 5G or a 4G? I mean, you've got to answer questions for them. And what do you look for? I mean, do you look to solve a problem, I'd imagine?
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, when you think about it, when you engage with the customer, it's really about trying to understand what are their needs, what are they trying to solve for, what is the problem that's driving them towards looking for a solution. And it's really not, I always joke around and people always give me a hard time because I say we don't pimp products, but what we're looking for is how do we drive a solution for our customer? How do we have that engaged conversation with them and help them kind of build a roadmap on how do I get from where I'm at now to what I'm trying to solve, and then what's that going to do for me in the future? And not even that, it's what am I going to be able to do with it beyond solving the existing problem? What is it? How am I going to future-proof this investment? How am I going to make it so that I can even leverage it further beyond, the existing thing that I'm working towards? And, when you engage with the customer, when you start talking about different technologies and different things, really try to avoid that specific as, hey, Wi-Fi gives you this speed, LTE gives you this speed, Wi-Fi has this, LTE has this. You avoid that, and it's kind of like, when you're looking for a solution that, I need wraparound coverage. I have a real issue where I have things within my manufacturing plant. Maybe I have different, vertical assets within that plant that causes a lot of interference with the Wi-Fi. What would LTE or what would a different type solution do for me there? And you start to talk about the characteristics of that, that ability to use multipath effect, the ability to give you better coverage in different areas. And so it's really more than it's not so much that you're trying to sell a customer on a specific thing. What you're really trying to do is help uncover what they're trying to do, and then start to open their eyes towards the different solution sets that exist that could drive towards solving that problem. And then further, taking them down that journey of how to get from point A to point B. What are the right, vendors that you want to bring in to do this, such as Cradlepoint. They have a great P5G solution that could be brought in to solve this problem. And we're going to work with them, and we're going to help you what you need to do in order to deploy that network, how to integrate that network. We'll help you do that design. We'll help you understand the integration points between your existing network and this future set network, and then how you actually enable your end devices to actually work on this network and integrate seamlessly through the entire network.
That's great. And I want to go back to something that Greg was also talking about, this comparison with Wi-Fi. And sure, we don't want to say we're replacing Wi-Fi or anything like that, but especially manufacturers that are looking for a technological solution for not just next year, but for, almost an entire transformation into a digital first footprint. But, Greg, let's be clear, private LTE or private cellular does offer mobility, full mobility, and other innovations that Wi-Fi just doesn't. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, because that is a big differentiation, and for at any organization, indoor, outdoor, manufacturing, transportation, logistics, whatever, there's a lot of moving things. It's almost like the next generation of enterprises includes the Internet of moving things. And so this matters, right?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely. There will be some environments that Wi-Fi could be sufficient, but in most environments, it's going to be more efficient not only to use some kind of private LTE or private 5G, but then you get all the things you mentioned, like handoff, mobility. You're generally going to get greater coverage. When you start looking at the allowances that we get from the FCC for transmit power, we get a lot more, at least in the outdoor space on the private cellular side, but even on the inside in practice, we can generally get more coverage out of those access points than, say, you would Wi-Fi. One of the surprising things I found out from one of our customers was that they were using Wi-Fi in a warehouse, and that's what they'd used for a while. And they decided, hey, let's put in some of this PCN stuff and see what this is all about. Couple things. They went from having, I believe it was 16 Wi-Fi APs to cover that warehouse. They went down to 2 cellular APs, And not only were they getting better coverage, handoff obviously was working way better, though not a huge consideration for them in what they were doing. But one of the big things that even kind of surprised me was the better battery life they were seeing out of their devices. They had told me, I talked to the warehouse manager there, and he said, generally speaking, on the Wi-Fi, they'd usually get a whole shift out of these devices before they'd have to charge them and, turn over devices to the second shift or the third shift or something of that nature. But they said they could sometimes get up to 2 complete shifts off of one device using cellular because of the lower power requirements, the efficiencies and things of that nature that you get out of private LTE that you're not going to get out of Wi-Fi.
Yeah, interesting. So let's kind of move to the next part of the discussion and talk specifically about the manufacturing enterprise and its needs, and not just today, but tomorrow and years to come, and how private cellular, private 5G, it's not just beneficial, but is really kind of a game changer for a lot of those kind of companies. And again, I'm going to go back to, UAVs on factory floors, cabling that can be replaced and used for wireless. And then, with private 5G, just the latency issues and the security issues. So Mike, maybe you go first and talk about your experience with manufacturers and what they see as kind of an aha moment when they see the difference between what they can do with this kind of, private cellular or private LTE network versus other things they grapple with.
Sure, absolutely, Tim. One of the things that when you start talking about the, manufacturing, and I always kind of go back to that drive towards Industry 4.0, but one aspect of manufacturing and at that move or that shift in that direction is that whole terminology about the flexible factory floor. And it's that ability to take it, and if you have a design for what you're doing in the manufacturing world, and you build out that factory floor, to do those production runs, to do that manufacturing against a specific product line, you typically in the old model is you would cable in all those machines into that factory line or into that line or that setup, and then whether you're using some sort of IoT SCADA, whatever you're using or controlling, or if you've got to talk or have the machines communicate to each other, they're originally kind of designed to be hardwired into the system, back into the IT systems. But as we evolve and you get into this flexible factory floors, you get into moving towards this next generation of manufacturing, you may find a better way to do a process line. You may do it because you're constantly doing that Lean Six Sigma across what you're doing, and you're trying to drive for how can I do what I'm doing more efficiently. So you may disrupt the way that you've set up that line. You may want to change it out. You may realize that there's a better way to do this. Well, in that cabled world, when I do that and I change that line, it causes me to have to recable that entire line. As you move towards this, this world where I'm using this private network that I've actually deployed in there, and I'm using my IoT sensors, or my devices are connected in through an RF environment, through a wireless infrastructure, my ability to get creative about how I want to change that factory floor, how I want to move it around, it causes a lot less overhead. There's a lot less, when you think about it, everything is it's based on one of three things. Either it saves me money, increases safety, or it increases productivity, right? If I have to shift around the factory floor, but it costs me money to do that shift, I'm not likely going to do it. But if I have that factory floor established and it's flexible, my ability to move it around, I don't get those costs from doing that shift. So that makes it a lot easier. It gives me it reduces one of those things that's going to limit me from doing that. The other aspects of it, when you really think about, moving towards the cellular world, and one of the things that you touched on is security. That's become a very important thing across these networks, across any network, right? Cybersecurity is a key thing. And when you think about that, I have equipment or I have manufacturing, I don't want anything to disrupt that. And I don't want any type of, outside interference to interfere. I don't want somebody to be able to get into my network and change what I'm doing. And when you talk about private LTE, one of the key aspects of it is, it's all SIM card based. So because it has that SIM card, it's got a public key infrastructure inherently built into it. That SIM card has my encryption certificate on it, and I'm AS256 encrypted over the air. The ability for somebody to break into that network is very limited. And if those end user devices are using those SIM cards, so they're inherently encrypted on the network. And even with the Cradlepoint network, you could take that all the way back through the S1 network back to the core. It is a fully encrypted network going out there to that radio and from the radio to that end user device. One of the aspects with Wi-Fi is everybody says, well, yes, I can definitely do AS256 encryption in Wi-Fi, and that's not an issue. It can be done. But that encryption typically has to be done on the piece of endpoint equipment and not necessarily on that RF device that's transmitting over the air. So if I've got an IoT device, that IoT device, I have to be able to install encryption on that device. You can't always do that. And with LTE, since it's inherently encrypted over the air, it gives you a much better, it gives you one of those, when you think about one of the earlier questions was, when I drive this into the enterprise space, what does the enterprise space, what is it, what's important to them? And cybersecurity is absolutely important to them. And so letting them know that, hey, I'm bringing security with me when I deploy this network, it's already in there. That cybersecurity checkbox, as far as encryption of the data being moved, the data moving, it's checked. And it's checked at a level that they're comfortable with. So those are just a couple of the eye-opening things that kind of been through, really that ability to be flexible, reduce costs that when I'm changing things out, and keep that level of security that we're always looking for on any type of enterprise network.
And Greg, isn't it true that with this kind of network, that the enterprise itself has, for lack of a better word, a single pane of glass that it can look through and see devices, endpoints, et cetera? And doesn't that change the management of devices and endpoints on that network? Doesn't it make it easier to move things in and off of that network?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I may tell a short story, in the past, I worked with another vendor's CBRS stuff. And it wasn't bad stuff by any means. But one of the struggles that we had with that vendor stuff isn't to do like the SaaS signing. You had to go to one site. If you wanted to manage the SIMs, you had to go to a different site, and they didn't talk to one another. So when you have that single pane of glass, all the administration becomes much easier. The day-to-day maintenance operations, whether it's updating firmware or just looking at what devices are getting on your network or which devices you don't want on your network, you can see all that stuff there. And all the security is baked in, but you get so much more control of different things like your QCI values. You get the security side in the sense of being able to, on the fly, turn on or turn off SIMs, give them certain security policies as well, and be able to see what they're actually doing in near real time. So that single pane of glass, while some people call it a Shangri-La that nobody's ever going to achieve, it is actually something that we do have, and it just makes things simpler. When you start to look at the enterprise environment for apps, for hardware, for stuff like that, everybody's talking about a single pane of glass, and there's a good reason for that. It's because it makes those workflows easier. It makes day-to-day jobs a little bit simpler, but also more clear. So if you, for example, have a security system that sits outside of, say, a networking infrastructure, you may not be told right away if you're having a security incident or a break-in or something of that nature. So if you can condense it under a single pane of glass, that's just better for everybody.
Yeah, and I would think that's a requirement for an IT team, right, who wants to be able to manage legacy stuff and new stuff, et cetera. So that it's kind of bringing a telco environment down to the enterprise network level, right? Yeah,
absolutely. And simplicity without being simplistic is key. You want to have it to be very flexible, very formidable, very helpful, but you don't want to have to get a doctorate in that solution to be able to use it or have to sit through months and months of training, right? We want it to be something that's pretty simple to use, because the simpler that things can be, the much easier when you can start finding things that are out of sorts. And so it's just that much easier to do your job, to secure the enterprise, to give the connectivity to the end users they need.
So I'd imagine, Mike, that making it simple like that means all the complexity and brain power goes into setting up the network, planning it, optimizing spectrum. Talk a little bit about that. And that's probably where all the Where BearCom comes into it is to do it right to begin with, so that downstream later on things can be added, devices can be added, functionality can be added without a whole lot of heavy lift.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that BearCom prides themselves on is we're end-to-end solution integrators for the customers. So, as the decision is made to move forward and to deploy this type of network, there's different aspects and different milestone stages that you have to go through in order for the implementation. And really, in the end, what you're looking for is a smooth implementation for the customer. You're looking for the system to be installed, optimized, turned up for the customer, and to be able to give that handover training and understanding of how the customer, what is their responsibility in order to utilize that network to ensure that everything is functioning properly. And if you take the time to actually go through, the initial design, as you go through those use cases, once you understand the solutions and what you're solving for and what you're attempting to do for that customer, you start to design that network in such a way that it has the coverage that it needs. It has that capacity that it needs. One aspect of it, especially in the manufacturing distribution world, is a lot of times there's an indoor to outdoor need. And what I mean by that is I may do certain things inside of the plant, but I also have shipping and receiving. I may need to do things all the way out into that, that kind of loading area, that area where I'm bringing supplies in, or I need to talk with trucks that are coming in. So you want to design a network that has those aspects, And with that Cradlepoint network, we have both the indoor and the outdoor. So we're able to build that network and design it for the customer and engineer what radios, what beads do we need on the outer edge? What beads do we need on the inner edge? How do we bring those two together so that we have a seamless communication as I'm moving from one zone to the next? And that's that whole handover aspect of it. Another aspect of it is with this spectrum, there is a certain amount of RF planning that has to be done. You have to actually go through and do an actual system design. Look at my coverage maps. Look at what it is. I have to understand, talked about that, in the CBRS band, we have this 355 to 37. You want to make sure that there's spectrum available in there, that you're working with the SAS to understand what's being able to be utilized. In the indoor environment, it's a lot easier to do that because there's power limitations and stuff. There tends to be less interference, but if you're doing an indoor to outdoor, you need to take that in consideration. So there's that whole RF design, and BearCom will do that whole design, whether it is indoor in a plant or it's outdoor, from an outdoor environment, and put together the whole RF environment. That way the customer will understand what does the coverage map looks like, produce actual heat maps so they know what they're getting from a network perspective. Once that design's done, then it's a matter of building out that BOM and understanding the cabling, understanding where things will be installed, understanding all the different parts pieces that are going to be gone through and what it takes to do it, where everything's going to be located. But another aspect of design that's really critical on these networks is working with the customer's IT department. You really have to work with them so they understand how is this private cellular network, how's it going to integrate back into the corporate network? What is the bridge on that? Or are we going to block it where it doesn't, but put in end-use areas where it can communicate? So it's really that working with them to help understand how that entire, design is done from an RF perspective, from an IT networking perspective, how I'm going to talk to end-user devices, how I'm going to do that. So once you have all that engineering, then it's a matter of doing the installation. Then we have teams that come in and they'll do that. They'll install all the hardware. They'll get it all set up. They'll get it done, get it all connected, get it connected back into, help with the programming that's needed with the customer to integrate into their network. And then taking it to the next phase, right? So you got to go through commissioning. Let's get the end user devices. Let's get those spun up. Let's get the SIM cards done. Let's get them added, back into the HSS. Let's get the SIM cards turned on. Let's get the devices turned on. Let's see what the quality of the network is. There may be optimization that has to be done. An RF design is based on a theoretical plotting of an area. But once you get in there and get actual RF environment, there could be factors that affect that. But then you go through, you maybe adjust CBSDs, tilts, directions, whatever, or physically moving them indoors to a better location. But you go through all that part of it, and then it's a matter of actually getting that network to actually do what the customer is looking for it to do. So it's working with them. Maybe they have AMRs, AGVs, or, maybe they have, different robotics that are going to be working on this, or IoT networks. But it's making sure those are integrated, those are talking through the network, working with the customer to ensure that they're hitting the internal servers that they need to hit, that everything's set up right. And then it's a matter of just educating the customer on, hey, these are areas you look for. If you have issues or whatever, here's how you get a hold of us. Here's how we work with you to ensure that you have a reliable network and that network's going to meet what your demands today and moving into the future.
So, Greg, I have a question that follows on all the things that Mike just said. For the enterprise team, do they require any special expertise or technical knowledge once Cradlepoint and BearCom set up the network and then move on to the next project? What does the team have to do or know in order to continue to manage something new? Is it? Can you talk a little bit about that?
One of the things we expect with our partners, especially a great partner like BearCom, is there's going to be a lot of knowledge transfer that goes between them to the end user, the ultimate end user, right? But beyond that, we do have a bunch of training that's available for it. It's about 9 hours worth of curriculum, but that's up to an expert level. So I guess to kind of simply answer your question, there's not a ton. Definitely navigating, know where to click, where not to click, things like that. And perhaps there's going to be certain education that BearCom will give, like, hey, SaaS, like, Tim already mentioned, or Mike already mentioned. And going in and saying, here's what this does, this is what that does, and having the ability to go and do that. Now, does it take somebody super specialized to do that? No, not at all. Again, we're trying to kind of bridge that gap between the cellular and Wi-Fi worlds and use some familiar technology or terminology so that the people aren't going to kind of be feeling like, hey, I just got to learn this whole new thing. It makes no sense to me. I need to demystify it. So we want to really try to deliver it that way. But then again, we know BearCom's going to lead the charge on that and is going to give them all that education they need. We will only supplement it.
Yeah, so there's tools for them to learn what they need, and there's probably career paths for people at the enterprise level who can turn this into a real, expertise that they can offer and grow their enterprise functionality as well as their own, skill set.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like I see us right now, I think we're kind of at the beginning of the whole private cellular revolution, if I can use that word. And I think it's just like when you look at Wi-Fi back in the early days, you had people coming in and saying, hey, Mr. Customer, that new iPack that you have or that Palm Spring, now you can untether from that dock that's on your station. And people were saying, well, that's kind of cool, but, all my PCs are wired in, or I have all my PLCs wired in, et cetera, et cetera. But look at where we are now, not too far in the distant future. Everybody, including their grandmother, has Wi-Fi. So I think we're pretty early stages on the cellular side, but it's moving very quickly. Just the amount of certifications we're seeing for end-user devices from OnGo compared to 3 years ago is pretty staggering. The growth is huge. So I see this in the future as definitely being something from a career path. Everybody's going to have this in the future in one degree or another. I absolutely believe that's going to be true. Manufacturing is going to lead the charge, I think a lot of like they did in Wi-Fi, but it's going to branch out beyond that too. And having those skills for the future is going to be really important.
We only have a few more minutes left, but let me, take what you just said, Greg, and give this to both of you guys. Knowing what you know now and knowing what, your history, both of you, what advice would you give an enterprise IT team or a CTO or a CIO? What advice would you give them when they're considering deploying a private cellular network? And the answer to that, I want both things: an internal, discussion. What would they need to do for themselves before BearCom and Cradlepoint even show up? And then secondly, what do they need to be able to answer from you guys in order to make, theirs, whatever they're trying to solve, work better? So do you understand that one? They need to know what they can and can't do, but they also need to be able to articulate to you guys what it is they want to do. So give some best practices or just some advice that you would give to somebody who has not taken the step but is definitely thinking about it.
With anything, as when you think about it, being in the CTO seat, so I kind of get to see some of this stuff. I look forward across our company and what we want to do and what initiatives we want to do. And I always come back to, right, is with any decision, and I'm going to apply technology and I'm going to utilize that technology to solve a problem. It's back to that space of what problems am I solving, right? I got to either reduce costs, and I always go back to this because it's really that simple. Increase safety or increase productivity, right? And so when I look at a technology and I start looking around and I'm investigating all the different technologies that are out there in the world, and everybody's got something new that's going to solve the problem. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. But I really have to look at it for my organization as to what am I trying to do to meet any of those three criteria. And one of the things about LTE, it's a backhaul network. And when I think about what do I need to do and why would I invest in this, it's what is that backhaul going to give me? And what am I going to be able to utilize it for? And how am I going to be able to leverage it to do one of those three things? And when you start talking about, putting in a really strong backhaul network, as we went from twisted pair, we had fiber. Now we have the RF environment where I can really build a high-speed, low-latency network over an RF environment. And, Wi-Fi was out there, and that's one of those other environments that you can do it with. But what do I get? What am I going to drive towards? So when I start looking at it, I start thinking about the fact that, if I can build a high-speed, high-secure, low-latency network that gives me the flexibility to take what I'm doing on my factory floor or anywhere in my environment to be able to do both indoor and outdoor, and look at that as to trying to drive to solve a problem. I've got the ability to completely move around that environment when I'm talking about an AGV or AMR or talking about those type of devices. It starts to give me some advantages. So then it starts to kind of make sense. I can start to build a justification on why I want to go to this. So what does that customer need to do to start that off? They may not understand that they get all these benefits from an LTE network. So, with anything, as you start investigating technology, sometimes you just got to reach out to a Cradlepoint and reach out to a BearCom and say, look, this is what I'm trying to solve. This is the business case that I'd like to build. These are some of my constraints, but here's where I think I could really leverage and really improve what we're doing as an organization. Can you help me find a pathway to it? So when you talk about what should a customer bring or what's the questions, it's really, what are you trying to gain? What are you trying to solve? What are you trying to grow towards? Where are your pain points? Where do you need to see things? And let's help work with you to build a business case to justify why taking this type of technology is going to solve one of those three things. Back to, again, does it reduce costs, increase safety, or increase productivity? And a really high-speed, low-latency backhaul network can give you that ability to do those things. You can potentially put cameras in places you've never thought about putting a camera just because you couldn't do it before because I can't run a cable there, right? That can increase with safety. That could increase those aspects of it. Building that flexible factory floor that we've, talked about a lot throughout this conversation. But beyond that, it's my ability to really take and drive towards, and I touched on it earlier, this whole concept, especially manufacturing, around Lean and Six Sigma. How can I look at processes that I do, and how can I try and improve those processes? And having that flexibility to almost put anything anywhere, because I have a wireless backhaul that's going to let me do that with technology, that opens me up to coming up with a whole new way of doing processes and a whole new way of thinking. Technology is great, but it has to have really strong processes, in the background to do that. And so when a customer thinks about how do I start this journey, it's really a lot about what am I trying to solve for? What do I see as an advantage? And if I don't understand what it is, reach out to people that have done that, or reach out or just start to look across the community and see where it is. Talk to other people that have talked to people that have done it. But a BearCom or a Cradlepoint can really help people understand how you can leverage this technology in such a way to truly solve problems. And I don't know, Greg, you want to go further on that? I kind of rambled.
No, it was fine. I was going to say you did steal all my answers, so I could try to sound smart. But no, in all reality, I think the biggest thing I want to emphasize there too, and just echo what Mike said, is get involved with the community. Look at what else is out there, right? So you, in my mind, you kind of have, when you're thinking about a new solution, whatever that solution may be, is it going to be to replace an existing solution? Or maybe we're putting in a new building, we're moving a floor line, we're going to build a new building with a new floor line, right? Look at other things than what you're used to. Whether that, maybe we've always done Wi-Fi. Maybe let's look at private cellular. Let's look at the benefits and the three different things that Mike has said about, productivity, safety, and time. So those things are super important. And I wish I had something else clever to say, but Mike just freaking nailed it. So I don't have much more to add there.
Yeah, no, I think he did too. I think flexibility is part of that. It's, there's a lot of companies that don't know what they're going to be doing in 5 years, but flexibility, building in flexibility, like not just the flexible factory floor, but data points, analytics that you're going to get from a network like this all factor into it. So any last minute comments, Mike or Greg, about private cellular as it relates to manufacturers?
One other thing because we didn't quite touch on it throughout the whole conversation, but one of the huge advantages, especially when you start talking about the IoT world, and you think about the factory floor and moving to Industry 4.0 and that whole ability for having this, machine-to-machine conversation or having everything, it's really giving everything on the factory floor the ability to be part of the communication or be part of the conversation. And your ability to deploy thousands of IoT devices across the factory floor to give, I like to say every machine on the floor should have a voice. Your ability to do that in an RF world or, in a private cellular world, it is just huge. It's something that couldn't be done before in the wired world because it was just too much to do that. But when you have this RF environment where I can let anybody, any machine, any person, anything have a voice in that network or be able to communicate back to it, that's what really drives Industry 4.0. It's everything's able to talk to everything else.
Yeah, and that starts with connectivity. You can't have digital transformation unless you have connectivity first. Mike, I have a question for existing enterprises that want to explore or even deploy a network such as this that you and Greg have been speaking about. What is the process for them to move to the next network without incurring a ton of disruption or a lot of downtime with their existing enterprise and their existing functionality? Do you have a solution that or a process that helps with that?
Yeah, sure, Tim. I can discuss how this. So typically how these deployments go and how as we all know, right, a factory floor, it's all about running that production line, and it's all about making those quotas. It's all about, doing that continuous operation. Downtime is money. And not only that, sometimes it's, if you have to stop a factory line, it can be catastrophically expensive to get that factory line restarted even, and it's never good to have to shut down a production line. So how do you go through and do these deployments so that you're least disruptive as possible? So, when we talk about the engineering that's done, that's one of the aspects that we look at. When we talk about looking at AP placement, and we talk about kind of the access point, the radios that you're going to connect to that are going to get mounted within the factory and typically in the factory ceiling or a factory at a height high enough in the ceiling to give you coverage over the areas. But one of the aspects we look at when we do RF design, it's not just that RF coverage design, but it's part of that installation integration that we do is we look for areas that we can get the coverage that we need for that factory floor, but also look at it from an installation perspective that we're going to be as less disruptive as possible to that factory or that production line. So you look for areas where you can have access with the lift to get to those areas without having to disrupt the production line. So it's really, those are different parts that are looked at to try and minimize. We really don't want to ever cause any downtime to the production line as we do the installation, but cabling has to be done. They have to be run through there. So you look at that, it's all a strategy about how you can do that. As you cut the network over, as you work with that IT team, really, that's we talk about that there's a level of network engineering's done. Well, that's critical also. And what we're looking at is adding a new segment to that network. So as we bring this private LTE or private cellular network online, we're adding a new segment to their network. So we're trying to make it where we don't have to be disruptive to how the existing network, the way the network, the virtual LAN infrastructure is set up. All of that is that we're just adding to it. So as we cut these radios on, as we turn this network up, it just becomes a new segment of their network. So it's not disruptive to the existing IT network. And then with the endpoint devices, with anything like that, if I'm going to take a piece of equipment, I'm going to cut that device on. So those are some of those areas where you've got to really have an understanding about, that modem that we're putting onto that device that's going to connect in. How do we connect that to that piece of equipment? And that's where, we may rely more on that customer's expertise about how to integrate that machine or that piece of equipment into it. With AGVs and AMRs, it's easy because you can pull them out of production, change over the modems, put them back into production. With devices, when you're talking IoT on the line, there's a certain amount of cutover that has to be done as you move it from one network to the other. But what's really key about this is that's part of, when you're looking for doing these type of deployments, that's part of it that has to be taken in consideration. And that's one thing that BearCom has definitely worked to understand and work with the customer to ensure we minimize downtime as much as possible.
Greg, I have a question for you. When it comes to deploying networks, private networks for an enterprise, let's talk about how you scale the network as a whole for an enterprise who may go into, the discussion with one set of specifications, but really wants to ramp up that network, both device functionality, the network as a whole. How do you manage a challenge such as that?
So like a good example, say somebody wants to dip their toe into the PCN world, they put a couple APs in, and then they realize, hey, we want to put these devices on it, we want these applications on it, we want this covered and stuff like that. So that's actually one of the things that we think that we're really prime and well set for, is the fact that we have the ability to actually go out and support up to 100 access points, thousands of SIMs. So if you go into a very small environment with just a couple APs, but you need more, it's very easy to put them in. You don't have to forklift anything. You may have to run some cable, but it just integrates into the existing network that you already have. And you really don't have to worry about much else except for inserting the SIMs and mounting those new APs. Very easy to integrate, maybe take about a minute or two per access point as far as the config side is concerned. But again, very simple.
Thanks again for your time today, Mike and Greg. For those of you who are watching or listening to the podcast, if you have any more questions or would like to learn more about private cellular and private networks, I encourage you to go to BearCom.com, look for Mike Owen, or go to Cradlepoint.com. Both websites have lots of information, lots of content, lots of expertise to share, and you can probably get everything you need to know from either site for what you're looking to do.
Tim, I appreciate your time. I appreciate you spending a few minutes having a conversation with us, Greg. It's always great talking with you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, guys, for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. It's awesome to see you guys. Awesome to nerd out a little bit. I know I've learned a lot here, so I really appreciate your all's expertise and inviting me along.
Yeah, it's certainly fun to talk about. We do this every year, once or twice, Mike and I. So Mike Owen, Greg Kamer, thanks very much. Appreciate your time.